back here in 1994.
I'm probably not going to think much of Mayor Helmke. They're not going to be talking about Mayor Helmke.
Okay.
But I think that's where it's interesting to talk about 100 years ago and to try to figure out what changes have occurred since then. And we've talked about the technology changing, but I even occasionally in speeches I'll try to get people to create a picture in their mind of what Fort Wayne was like 100 years ago and to see where we've come since then. And 100 years ago, the courthouse hadn't opened yet. There weren't too many buildings at all in the downtown area or any place that were the same. So, it's hard to imagine. You'd hope that a building like our courthouse would still be preserved and still standing 100 years from now. But what other buildings are going to be? Are any of the schools going to be around? Is Northside going to be there? Or some of the classy structures?
Yeah.
And you hope so. And I think we're trying to do a lot more of that than I think maybe they were even doing back then. But, historic preservation has only been something really we've been doing maybe the last 20 years, and even not that good of a job on that. So
that's true. There's a lot of buildings that
it's even just interesting trying to think what's it going to look like. The rivers presumably are still going to be here, still going to be flat. And climate's probably not going to change too much, but you don't know. You might have tall buildings and everything hooked by walkways or underground.
A lot of it, we were talking, shopping might all be done electronically, through a computer or something. There may not even be malls and things like that.
So it's hard to think of things. You have to really go through a process to figure out what we've got now is still going to be around then, and that's necessary to figure out what we're doing now. What that we're doing now is going to be important 100 years from now. I would tend to think that our efforts, like on headwaters, could still be important 100 years from now. If we turn that area in the thumb into a park, hopefully that's still going to be parkland 100 years from now. So that might be something people would look back and say that 100 years ago, one of the things they did with the bicentennial, with Mayor Helmke, with all of the volunteers was to turn a developed park, part of downtown, into a park, and hopefully that'll stay. The areas that have turned into parks in our city, in our state, in our country in the past generally have stayed that way. So hopefully that'll be something that'll be there. Our efforts, presumably to fight flooding, will still play a role. I would hope that 100 years from now, presumably the rivers will still be there. Presumably they'll be an asset instead of a detriment to the city. Presumably we'll have the river greenway system, more full parks along all the river banks. The houses and the businesses pulled back from the river's edge, or protected from the river in such a way that the rivers turn into our friends, and that'd be great. So I think you have to almost tie into some of the natural attributes of the city that have been here, that were here 100 years ago, 200 years ago even, and figure that they'll be here 100 years from now, and what are we doing to them now to help them stay. That's not always the way you look at things, though.
Yeah, when I started doing this, I was thinking, what would I have liked to have seen if there'd been video film in 1894? And you think of a lot of the things that you're talking about, what the rivers look like, what buildings were here that are still here, what my neighborhood looked like versus what's it look like now. And that's what we're trying to get in the show is Fort Wayne today, so 100 years from now, you say, gosh, look at that.
It's one of my set speeches. Sometimes I talk about if we travel back 100 years ago, you wouldn't recognize much of anything except the structure of government. Of course, that's something you can't see in a video either. It's amazing to me that really we have the same structure of government here locally that we had actually in 1850, much less 1894. And I've always argued that we need to reevaluate perhaps our system where we've got 20 townships in the county, and we've got a city government structure, a county government structure, special district structure. That doesn't show up on videotape, but I would hope we'd find some ways to make sure that that government structure has evolved in such a way to protect people's individual rights as well as accomplish what they want to accomplish for the common good. That always hasn't happened, but that'd be an interesting issue to look at 100 years from now and see what we're doing now that changes that, because that's almost like the rivers, something that moves so slowly that you don't know if there's going to be change.
100 years ago, maybe I'm wrong, weren't there more than two political parties, main political parties?
It was still pretty much
But was it
Republican,
still?
Democrat even 100 years ago.
Okay.
Occasionally you'd see a third party rising up, but at the national level, they were pretty much Republican, Democrat the way we are now. You'd occasionally see a progressive party or something. And locally, it was pretty much the same way. I mean, you had a mayor, you had a city council, you had county commissioners, you had the whole bit.
Well, one thing that could change in terms of politics is the way voting is done. I mean, I would think 100 years from now, you're probably not going to have ballots, but just probably vote from home through a computer or some electronic way, which could open it up to more than two parties.
That's really, when you look at where government might be going, if you're getting into the stage where you can be voting electronically for who's representing you and who's carrying out policy, you also get to the stage that maybe we'll be making decisions that way. Is the city council going to be relevant? Are decisions on policy going to be made by let's watch a TV show or whatever the equivalent of the information disseminator is 100 years from now. Everybody here's the information and then indicates yay or nay on it.
Exactly.
And that might be the way things are done. And with the electronic information superhighway electronic systems, we're more capable of that now than we were even 5 or 10 years ago. And 100 years from now, presumably, we'll be able to get information out and get people's reactions to it.
Right, because if we change as much in 100 years as we have the past 100 years, it's just mind-boggling. Another thing I thought about was, what if somebody could come back? I mean, like they were 60 years old, died 1894, and they came back. I mean, just think, you mentioned television. Things we take for granted would just be like, what is this?
Well, it's my grandparents are all deceased now, but they were. My dad's parents were born in 1901. My mother's parents were born in the 1890s, and I just think about the changes they saw in their lifetime. And my dad's mother didn't die till just a couple of years ago, but I mean, in her lifetime, the airplane was invented, television, radio. Fort Wayne was a real different world. At the school she went to, St. Paul's Lutheran School, they spoke. They taught German and they had church services in German. Then, what sort of languages are we going to be speaking? Is English going to still be the language? Is there going to be a new worldwide language? Is there going to be everyone speaking, Spanish, German, English, Russian, French? Who knows what?
Exactly.
It's you assume that you're going to be doing some patterns, but that's not always true.
Exactly.
And Fort Wayne's a lot. Actually, it's interesting looking at Fort Wayne because we've gone through ethnic phases. I think probably more 100 years ago, or we were more aware of it 100 years ago. You had the German influx, but you had Poles or Irish or others coming in. In the last few years, we've been getting more Spanish-speaking population, some Vietnamese, some Asian population. How's that going to be? Maybe this community is going to be a completely different ethnic mix 100 years from now.
Exactly. I mean, it's been primarily German, but as you say, now there's all kinds of people.
Yeah, most of the Germans came over by 1880, and that was a long time ago. So
exactly. And we're trying to get some of that ethnic diversity represented too. And another thing we did, you mentioned a little while ago about going down to the hobby house, and where Dave Thomas got his start, who's now become famous on the Wendy's commercial and starting Wendy's and so forth, which is another tremendous change. Even from when I was a little boy, there were no such things as fast food, McDonald's.
The closest to fast food was a hobby house or something where you could get a hamburger, maybe get out in a half hour to an hour. Now it's, if you have to wait 2 minutes in the drive-through line, you consider, I ought to go someplace else. And it's strange to even look at some of our downtown streets and to realize that you're going to a Taco Bell or an Arby's or a McDonald's or a Subway or whatever, and that's, the eating habits have changed quite a bit. I mean, right now we are still a city of restaurants, so a lot of people like to go out and eat at the Janelle's and everything else.
Lots of nice restaurants, lots of fast food.
But that's even changed, you're right, since I was a kid.
Yeah.
The schools have changed since I was a kid. I mean, it used to be you went to your neighborhood school, you walked to your school. The people on the sports teams at that high school were kids that you saw playing basketball in the alley down your block and followed through. Now, just in the last 20 years, though, we've more people go to different schools around town for different reasons, either racial balance or special programs. We've had high schools built out further than they were before. It's you don't have to look back 100 years to find changes.
No, and I think that's a good point, and I think maybe it might have to do with some of the problems we have. I mean, that one of the things we did was, I know you went to Northside, right? And you're probably aware that in 1949, Look magazine named Fort Wayne the happiest city in America. Right. And to illustrate the story, they had a picture of 13 girls from Northside out on the riverbank. Well, we tracked down 7 of those girls, now women, and got a like number of kids from Northside, girls, and went to the riverbank and had a really good conversation out there. And one of the things that they were talking about was that the 49 kids, walked to school, walked to and from basketball games, no matter what, they said it's nothing to walk home from South Side 11 o'clock or catch the bus. And all those things have changed, and maybe there's some sense of community disappearing.
Yeah, and that's a significant issue. I mean, one of the things that's an issue for me almost every day is trying to do what I can to strengthen a sense of community. And I would hate to see this area disintegrate. It's good to have diversity, but you need people feeling a sense of community, pulling for common goals still. And I mean, that's one of the reasons why I think the annexation program we're doing now to extend the city boundaries has been important. I think that'll, down the road, help people think of themselves as being part of Fort Wayne. And if we hadn't done that, very easily could have developed into, well, there's Fort Wayne, and there's St. Joe, and there's Boyd, and there's Pine Valley, and you can have parts to a city, but I think you need to have some sense of a whole, and who knows where that's going to develop. I think one of the significant things that's happened while I've been mayor is that we've had substantial annexation, adding 26,000 people with our annexation in the St. Joe Township area of the city, but who knows where that's all going to be 100 years from now? Where are the people going to be living? What's going to be the center of commerce? And one of the things, really, though, that I think is exciting for us now, and it's hard to picture where it's going to be, is I really see us as sort of a capital of the region here. It's a in effect, occasionally I'll give speeches and say, just as the township was sort of the thing that you dealt with daily, perhaps 100, 150 years ago, and county government was something you dealt with maybe once a month. Now, in effect, we've stretched those boundary lines because of the transportation system and the communication system, where people up in Angola might come down to Glenbrook to shop. They get their news out of Fort Wayne. They read the Fort Wayne papers. We benefit when a steel mill goes up into DeKalb County to the extent that that's helping create jobs, even though it's in a different county. And we're in effect a capital of a region. And one of the reasons we're able to become the capital of a region is that we're not really under the shadow of a large city. We're the same distance from Detroit, Chicago, and Cincinnati. They're all 3.5 hours away. And because of that, we don't really read the Chicago, Detroit, or Cincinnati papers, or get their TV, or influenced by their media market and their things. We're not a suburb of a megalopolis right now, and that allows us to have a different kind of character, a different sense of community, and become a regional capital. And where that's going to be 100 years from now, you don't know. I mean, cities generally don't move, but we've seen the east coast of the country develop into a basically solid city from Washington, D.C. up through Boston, too, so it could change.
We could in effect become a suburb of Chicago.
Yeah, that's hard to picture, but you don't know.
But you never know. I mean, you think
or maybe Indianapolis is going to grow up 69 or something. I mean, that's happening now with their urban area expanding northward and into Carmel and in Hamilton County. And maybe it's going to be solid urban from Indianapolis to Fort Wayne down the interstate. That's how patterns that developed on the East Coast will develop here. It's hard to believe it would, but
and I think getting back to your point about trying to keep this sense of identity, because when all those changes happen, and the city grows and the boundaries extend, I think maybe people have a problem thinking of the way they think about themselves. I'm thinking, for example, are you familiar with also the same era as the Dave Thomas and the Book magazine. The Howells Barn, the Howells Hotel, it was over at Hannah and Wallace.
Heard about it,
well, I met somebody, and they have reunions to this day, and this, of course, inner city people. And Howells Barn was a ice cream stand, dance hall kind of thing, where these kids met, and a lot of them married and formed friendships. And we went Friday night, they had a 50s dance over at the L. Jennings Center. And it just occurred to me, they met at an ice cream stand, and now there's all this violence in, you know, in that same area, and kind of, you know, our lifetimes kind of cover the same span. Do you have any ideas what's happened? I mean, in many ways things have gotten better, but something, like I talked to them and they said they think that our generation is giving the children of, maybe gave them too much, got them spoiled, and that was a factor. That's what some of the people said over there.
I mean, it's clearly different now than it was when we were growing up. And some things are better. I mean, it's, there's, I think, more opportunities for women, more opportunities for minorities, obviously, more acceptance of diverse backgrounds and cultures and orientations. But there's also been this disconnectedness with family or church or whatever that I think is part of the violence we're seeing, and that's a scary trend. I think sometimes when you look back at history, you see ups and downs on things like that, and read a book recently called 13th Gen, and it's one of these Generation X type books, but it deals not only with the Generation X types, supposedly born between, I think this book used it as 1961 through 1981, and that being the generation after the baby boomers, born from 45 to 61 or whatever. And one of the interesting things they did, not just talking about that generation, was comparing that generation and the boomer generation to generations in the past, with the Generation X being the 13th generation since the country's really been around, and how different, you know, every maybe 100 years or so you're seeing some of these generational patterns repeat themselves. And you'll get a self-centered generation, then you'll get maybe an altruistic generation, and that you get ups and downs. And in comparing this Generation X type, some of whom might still be around, you know, if they're born in 1981, they could be around still 100 years from now when the city's on the tricentennial. People are living longer, but you know, that generation is similar to the generation, for example, after the Civil War, that kind of had to clean up some of the messes. The Civil War generation perhaps was the activist generation that did things, but the next generation had to, you know, be quiet, clean up some of the messes, make some money at sometimes, but you know, really reacted to what had gone on. And in the book talks about you had a similar generation, I guess, back in the colonial times, after the Patrick Henrys and the George Washingtons and Thomas Jeffersons. You had the ones that, let's make this work now that they've put this new country together, and throughout the British and everything else. And you see different phases, and it talked about how oftentimes the young people in one of those generations, when they're starting out, they are disconnected. But as they grow older, then they become people that start doing things, usually individually still, but individually to help, you know, just make the system work. It's hard to tell what we're seeing. I guess part of what, and I ramble a little bit with that, part of what you see historically sometimes too is really that crime goes up as you get more young people. Most crimes historically are committed by people between 15 and 25, and that hasn't always started that low. Maybe it's been 18 and 25, but even when you look back at the Untouchables days, and in those you had some, you know, the Bonnie and Clydes were young people, the Billy the Kids were 19-year-olds, and with, you know, we've created this historical fiction that glamorizes some of the bad guys from eras past, but you know, at some extent it was bad guys, and they were using guns, they were violent, they didn't have a sense of connectedness, and we either ignored it or we glamorized it, but usually we tried to stop it in some way. So we've got violence now. Hopefully that's just a stage that the community or the country's going through that we can stop. I think it's interesting. I'm always concerned about guns, and that's controversial today. People, you know, sometimes argue we need guns, and And I think sometimes there's too many guns out there and it's too easy for people to get and they don't know how to use them clearly. But I think it's in Japan where Japan now has a real low murder rate. Probably in the whole country of Japan you might have less murders than you have in the city of Fort Wayne. But when you read about it historically, guns were introduced in the 1600s to Japan, and then they realized after 30 years how destructive they were and banned them for years. And you know, sometimes a society will revolt against something that's obviously dangerous and hurting itself. And who knows what we're going to do?
Yeah, with us, I think maybe it still goes back to that frontier mentality.
Well, in the past, I think what we did is the way we handled it is just push the people further west, and that's what. And now we can't do that anymore. And maybe they're getting pushed into the central cities instead. But it's an issue that affects everyone. How do we relate to other people? What role does law play? The balance of law versus liberty. And then you're seeing the arguments. I've got the rights to do what I want to do, but as you get more people and closer together, then you balance those rights, the liberties, against the rule of law. We haven't had to face a lot of those sorts of issues till just now with guns and violence and drugs coming up. How we're going to handle that, I don't know. And even the issue of drugs is one that's gone up and down over time, where things have been legal, then illegal, prohibition, the flapper generation during prohibition. Who knows what it's going to be like 100 years from now? Are people still going to be drinking or smoking or doing drugs, or are you going to have the Brave New World type Huxley vision where you just take a pill that gives you the highs and the lows and everything?
Exactly. As we're talking, it occurred to me another thing about the Howells reunion, that all these people who are now 50, 60 years old still have this deep reverence for this. Well, Mrs. Howells still living in poor health, and they sent her a great big card, and you can just see the affection. And what occurred to me was that so much of what happened then was natural. I mean, this woman and her husband and Al Jennings, those people, they didn't go out and say, I'm a role model for children, or I'm a mentor. I mean, they just were. It was a natural thing. And I know some people criticize, I don't know if you, but the government or whatever, for not having enough programs for kids, but it seems like there's just all kinds of programs.
So there are a lot of programs.
Doing this show, you become aware of what's going on because you're reading the paper, and my gosh, you can't keep up with it. If I had a crew of 10 people, I'd be hard pressed. If I just covered kids stuff. So it's easy to fool ourselves with history, and because you remember the good stuff, you don't remember the bad stuff always. You glamorize some of the bad stuff, or you ignore it, and it's also, we've become more introspective now. I mean, we question everything we do. Is this the right thing? Is this just a short-term fix, or is this a long-term fix? Are we role models? What examples are we setting? And everything from are we taxing ourselves enough, investing enough? I think in the past they just did things, and sometimes they did it right, sometimes they did it wrong. They just did things. And it's even interesting, I think, bringing out the point of the reunions in the past, or even doing a video like this, is, 100 years ago, I'm not sure they looked at family history and community history as much. I mean, today you see people doing reunions, doing genealogies, concerned about ancestors, concerned about preserving, the past in different ways, whether it's buildings or memories. And in the past, I know when my grandparents were alive, they didn't have that fascination with the past. It was sort of, the past was past. Ancestors might have come from Germany, no interest in going back necessarily. Let's move forward. And now I think we've got people that like to look in the past. And I think that's positive in some sense, but you also have to look forward at the same time too. That I just thought of an interesting thing. Like this thing of the Johnny Appleseed Festival, as you were talking. 100 years as mayor, you have a lot of influence on people's thinking, or?
I think the main thing one of the main things you have as mayor is you have a chance to help direct the agenda, the discussions in a way, and people always talk about a bully pulpit, the Teddy Roosevelt version of what the presidency could do. And a lot of jobs are that way. You don't have as much real power as people sometimes think you do. And even when I can direct the police department to do this or do that, those are individual officers that still do things on their own. But you can help set the community agenda. When, everyone obviously is concerned about youth and violence today, but you can help say, okay, let's not get all depressed about it. Let's figure out what positive things we can do, and basically, spur the community on to trying to find solutions to problems, and even when there's crises that occur, pat everybody on the back to say you're at least we're addressing them, and that's crucial. It's something that I think America can help set the agenda and keep the discussion going on the right track. And we've got a strong mayor system of government in this city now. I mean, I can help set the budget, help direct resources, push annexations through, help businesses out, help housing programs out, and that makes a difference. And it's interesting. I think it's interesting to follow the role that government plays in people's lives. And right now we seem to be going through an anti-government stage to an extent that I think over the last 15 years there's been a strong anti-tax mentality. And with Reagan's presidency, there was a strong government is the problem mentality. But in the 60s, you had a government can solve all the problems mentality, too.
Exactly.
And I think what we're getting into now, and I don't know where that's going, is that government can't solve all the problems, but government does play an important role. One of the things I try to do with school kids that come through is one of my questions is I ask them about taxes, and ask, who here likes taxes? And nobody raises their hand ever. And I say, would you like a community society that had no taxes? And generally they'll say, well, of course. I mean, that's the logical progression from saying they don't like taxes. And I say, have you ever thought what a society with no taxes would be? It's a society with no police officers, with no fire stations, with no stoplights, with no lane markers, with no streets for that matter, because those are all things that are paid for by taxes. And then they start realizing, well, they like knowing that there's a fire station someplace close, and that there's a stop sign and a stoplight out there. And it's almost, I point out that a society without taxes is the jungle, or perhaps the Wild West. I mean, and that almost every society throughout time, has formed some version of government. That there are some things you do collectively, for the common good or for common safety, and that's what government is. And how that government works is crucial to the kind of lives we lead. And when we go through this anti-government stage, that scares me to the extent that, I don't want to go too far into the anarchy. You don't want to go into the stage where we turn to government for all the answers and they control our lives either. That's a tricky balance.
Yeah, and I think it's that disconnectedness too. Part of what people feel is government no longer represents me. They're representing themselves. They're getting what they need, but my needs are being ignored. I think part of that anti-government feeling right now. And
it's strange too, because if anything, politicians, governmental leaders today are probably more well-known, more heard than in the past. You look 100 years ago, I don't know for sure, but I don't know if most people would have recognized their mayor. They didn't have ways to see the mayor on television like people do in every home. Now, maybe the community was small enough that there were enough speeches or whatever that you saw that, but now we feel that we personally know our leaders, whether it's Bill Clinton president or a Paul Helmke mayor. You recognize them, you know what they talk like. Now, part of the downside of that is then you see their weak sides, and I think that's part of the fascination with the foibles or human weaknesses that all of us have. And I think that's led to this sort of politicians aren't on the pedestal anymore, because that Bill Clinton might get overweight or be accused of womanizing, that kind of thing. And that's tricky. The Abe Lincolns you didn't see. You only knew what they were saying by what you read, if you could read.
Exactly.
And usually, some period of time after it really happened. Now everything's immediate. You see the news conferences, you see the decisions being made, and that's good that I think people are getting that access, but it's also led to a disenchantment. It's not like it is in the biographies when we were growing up.
Disenchantment, and throws you off your job, obviously. I mean, when Bill Clinton has to defend himself against lawsuits and all these, corruption charges, it's hard to do that and, do the job of president.
Well, I mean, Clinton's attacked the media and said, he's being attacked more than anybody else, and I'm not sure that's true. I mean, Andrew Jackson was vilified, and presidents throughout history, but the arena in which they were vilified, again, was generally a print medium at a time when a large proportion of the country couldn't read. And, so it was sort of an inner circle, and, maybe there were cartoons about Jackson or something that people could see, but again, how often did you see papers? Now everything's immediate, and the media covers everything too. What that's going to be like 100 years from now, I don't know. But it's changed the nature of the relationship between people and elected officials, and there's good sides to that and bad sides to it.
Exactly. I think maybe it's even changed the relationship between people, period, because it's the media. I think the main negative with the media is that they tend to take social issues and make entertainment out of it, like O.J. Simpson.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, there's a newsworthy item there, but I mean, at some point, where's it a news item and it's just entertainment on current affairs?
It's the downside of immediacy. Yeah, I mean, with the O.J. Simpson trial going on now, it's everyone in effect wants to be the juror now. They want to hear all the evidence, so they're going to turn on the TV to find out what the prosecution's presenting. Have they found the knife yet? How, what was the blood like on the stocking cap or whatever? And it's good for people to understand the court system and trials, but again, there aren't the protections there that we've built into a court system where you're excluding some evidence because there are reasons to doubt it. I mean, these rules were written for a reason, and it's almost the same issue like when we talked about whether people could perhaps be voting on policies 100 years from now. I mean, it's great that people have the access to the information and sort of able to register their opinion or their vote, yea or nay, but you lose sort of the deliberative function. I can't pay attention to everything that's going on now. As cable expands, as magazines and newspapers become more specialized, you lose the generalist, and even when you still have a broad range of interest, it's a lot more surfacey. You channel surf, and you're going to hear a couple minutes on O.J. Simpson, a couple minutes on Clinton and Whitewater, and a couple minutes on annexation or crime in the city, and then you jump to something else. And so your views are formed by 1 or 2 minutes worth, and you want someone, even if they're intelligent and concerned and involved, you want decisions being made based on that information. I wouldn't want to make decisions just based on a couple minutes of what I've heard on TV. I would sooner trust someone, even if I might not think they're as smart as I am or might not think they agree with me philosophically on issues. At least they're hearing the testimony that's being presented to the jury, or they're hearing the debates in Congress, and that's on health care. I'd prefer that they do that because I'm not spending the time doing that. And I don't know if I'd want a system where I'm making those decisions just based on again, a couple minutes worth of headlines.
That's an excellent point. I mean, you mentioned the super information highway, but it's tidbits of information more than the in-depth thing, which is this explosion of media has created for us.
Well, it's computers and all that too. I mean, presumably each year we're going to have more information at our fingertips and be able to punch in, any magazine, any newspaper, but there's only a limited number of hours in the day. There's only a limited amount that the mind can hold, and I'm not sure how much that's going to change 100 years from now. That's
exactly. And in your job, I mean, on the one hand, you're a product of media. I mean, you're on TV a lot, high visibility. Yet you have the mayor's night in. You go out and do a lot of public events. We were out at that Sycamore Hills benefit. You were just leaving when you came into the banquet to give a talk. And how do you balance that? I mean, first of all, you got what you've already alluded to. You've got Paul Helmke, the image of Paul Helmke through TV and so forth. You've got Paul Helmke, the person, the family man, etc. Is that difficult for you? Is that a hard part of your job, do you think?
I've been mayor for about 6.5 years now, and then I'm asked, what's the good spots, what are the good parts, what are the bad parts? And it's almost the flip side of the same thing. The best part of the job that I like is I like meeting people. I like dealing with different people, and I think for a politician or a governmental person, but clearly someone who's running for office, I think you truly need to like people to be good at it. There are some politicians that I don't think like people. I'm not sure Richard Nixon really was comfortable with people, or you get others that are that way. But I think it's important to like people, and I do. And so I like doing a neighborhood walk or meeting the strangers that come in. And a part of my view of things is you learn something from everybody, and so that's the positive side of the job. The negative side of the job is there's so much going on that it can wear you down trying to get to everything. And that's the balance. And again, I've got 2 daughters and have a family life, and want to spend time doing that, or just time relaxing, playing golf, reading books, whatever. And that's hard to balance. But I see my job, and this sort of gets into the speech I give to the school kids too. I always ask the school kids, who's my boss? And that gets tricky. And I get everything from the president to the governor to the congresswoman. One time someone said Susan Bai. But I explained to them that the boss is who hired me and who can fire me, the people. The boss is the people that pay my salary, the taxpayers. And that takes a while to get through to kids. And then I say, one of the challenges is I want to find out what my boss is saying, and that's the public. And the challenge is, how do I communicate with the boss? And part of the way that I think that I communicate, anybody communicates with the public, is through the media. So you try to be accessible. You try to do a lot on TV. You try to do a lot in the print media, and that reaches a broad range of people. But you need to see people in the flesh too. So you do the neighborhood walks and the ribbon cuttings and the welcome speeches to the groups, just so you have a chance to hear what people are saying. When I was in the job for a few years, some of my staff was saying, you're going to do too many fluff things. You need to pay attention to the policy issues. And you do have to pay attention to the policy issues. We've got a strong mayor here, not just a ceremonial mayor. But I said, these aren't really just fluff things. These are things that you need to go to have an unstructured environment where someone can go up and say, the police didn't respond quickly the other night when my car was broken into, or there's a pothole here, or the sign's covered up with the tree branches. You need that informal setting, the things that are on people's minds that they're not going to write a letter about or call you about, and that's important. And I also argue, and this is part of my political science theory, is that it's important to go out I call it my poker chip theory of government, and that is, I think someone, when they're elected, it's like they're given a stack of poker chips, and the job of government is to try to accomplish positive things, and people might disagree on what those are, but when you try to accomplish anything, generally there's going to be controversy involved, and when you have controversy, you in effect spend your chips. Anytime I do an annexation, anytime we have to raise utility rates in order to help the infrastructure, anytime there's a tax increase to add more police officers, there's controversy involved in that, and that means I'm spending chips. I'm spending some of the goodwill that I got, that they gave me the day I was elected. And to me, the challenge for a politician is, there's 2 types of politician I don't like. One is the politician who never spends their chips at all, and I think sometimes you see that with political people. They won't want to do anything controversial. Always, which way's the wind blowing? What do the polls say before they do things? They won't want to spend those chips. I mean, to me, why bother to get in the job? If your only reason for being there is to make sure you can get reelected, and that's why you're not voting this way or that way, even if you think it's right, then you're not spending those chips. That's wrong. You were given a stack of chips. Your job is to try to accomplish something with it. So I just like that kind of politician. The other kind of politician that is bad, though, too, is the one who spends all the chips real quickly and isn't able to do even more. And so what I tell people is that you spend the chips in big chunks. Again, a controversial issue takes a big chunk away. But you get them back one at a time when you do the ribbon cutting, when you do the speech, when you walk the neighborhood, when you stop by the playground and talk to the kids. And so it's important to do those, quote, fluff things, not just to hear the people, but basically that's the way you maintain a political stack of chips, so you're able to accomplish positive things in the future.
That's a really good way of
I haven't
putting
seen that
it.
written up yet. I need to do that someday.
Okay,
but,
that's
yeah.
Paul Helmke original
Yeah.
there. That's good. And also, you sort of, as mayor, give an event credibility, I think. I mean, it's like the mayor is here, therefore our event is
Well, I
worthy.
think it's a way of representing the community. It says this is an important event, this is an important group, this has meaning in the life of the community. And there's a ton of groups out there, but I'm always happy to do that. And actually, it's exciting how many groups are out there doing things. I thought I was real active in the community before I became mayor, and I'm just amazed at the number of people that are doing positive things.
There's really a lot.
And that makes it fun.
There's really a lot. What are you proudest of? Either as mayor or lawyer, family man, or a couple things?
Well,
What really makes you feel?
I guess I ran for mayor, and because I mean, let me go into a little bit of the background on why I wanted to get involved. My family's been involved in this community for a long time, and my father's a lawyer and was in politics. My grandfather was a lawyer and was in politics. His father was a shoemaker. Business person, and had come over from Germany. But I feel that the community's been good to my family. People have benefited from it, have done well, have been able to raise good children and have good families and get a lot out of the community. And so I was raised with this idea that you want to put something back. You want to make sure that it's doing this for the future. And I felt I had skills in this area and wanted to do that. To me, the greatest challenge and the thing that I hope I've accomplished and feel I've accomplished is putting something back into the community to make sure that we're going to be a better community 10 years from now, 20 years from now. 100 years is a long way out, but you do what you can at least to pass on the baton to the next generation and hopefully make it a little bit better. And whether it's annexation, which I think is important to a sense of community and the financial viability of the place, or the infrastructure issues, the diking projects for the rivers, the Headwaters Park concept. These are ways that hopefully I've helped make it a little bit better for the people that are going to be calling the shots and running things and raising families and looking for jobs down the road. And I feel good doing that, and I feel that's sort of the way I'm repaying the debt that perhaps my family's had for having had a chance to have a healthy start and a successful lives and careers in this community. And this is the way to pay back, as well as the way to help make it better for my children or grandchildren that are going to be coming here. And I think that's what each of us needs to do. We need to think in terms of the past and our obligation to the past and the future, our obligation to the future. And that's a battle. It's really easy to concentrate just on the present. But I guess I'm proud of what I've hopefully been able to do that is part of that continuity, making it a little bit better place. Whether it's new buildings downtown, broader tax base, healthier infrastructure, more leisure activities, the baseball stadium, things like that. Making it a better place is something important. One of my theories is things don't stay the same. And I mean, sometimes a lot of us wish that it were the way it was when we were growing up. I mean, again, you have those positive memories. I like the Fort Wayne I grew up in. I like the schools. I like the neighborhoods. Yeah. That was neat, and it's different today. And I think sometimes we say, I don't want change. I want what we had in the 50s or the 60s. Sure. You're never going to have things like that. Things don't stay the same. They either get worse or they get better. And I got into a job like this, and what I hope I've done with a job like this is make sure that trend line is on the better side, or more on the better side than on the decline side. And that's a continuing battle. But you do your best, you try hard, and hopefully there's going to be other people that are going to have that same kind of commitment and make it such that 100 years from now that it's a place that people want to live and people feel proud about, people want their families to stay in.
You mentioned one of your grandfathers was a shoemaker. One of the things we're trying to do, and I think is a flaw in our society, there's certain people, mayors, politicians, athletes, put on a pedestal in a way, and as you say, the downside of that is you can get knocked off real fast. But so many of the people, just the common people, they don't get on TV and they don't get their views known. So we're trying to gets those people in too. Like when we went to Mad Anthony, we interviewed caddies and groundskeepers, not just the so-called celebrities. And I like the fact that, you know, from a shoemaker, that I think people might tend to think, well, Helmke's, you know, they've just always been lawyers and big shots. And yet you started from a very humble, not that there's anything wrong with a shoemaker. I mean, I think...
Well, I think that's what's fascinating about meeting people. I interview kids that are applying to Yale every year. I went to Yale for law school, and it's fun because you see some of the sharp kids in the school system. But one of the kids that got in this year met his father a couple weeks after I'd interviewed him. I was doing a mayor's night out at one of our schools, and his father's a maintenance person at one of the middle schools, and you can be proud of yourself in any job. You should do a good job. And I think, here's a, most people wouldn't think that this is one of the highest jobs. His son is one of the smartest kids in this town, got into the best schools in the country, is going to be clearly making, a difference in whatever area he gets into. But his father is making a difference too, because not only of what he's doing in his job, but what he's done for his family. And I think that's what's exciting. I mean, and the more people you meet, you realize those connections. And one of the things I've enjoyed in my life, and it's not just with this job, is meeting people around the country. And you realize you can deal with presidents and vice presidents and senators and cabinet people. They're not that much different from any of us here.
Right.
And, to an extent, that could be disappointing to some people that they're not the exciting heroes of days gone by. But I think it's more exciting to realize that they're not much different than the guy down the street that runs this business or works in this factory or whatever. And it's, their interests might be different, and that's why they went into politics or whatever they went into, but they're people. They've got strengths, they've got weaknesses, they've got concerns, and I like that. I've had the opportunity, it's interesting with the national political scene, I've known, I went to law school with Bill Clinton, Bill and Hillary, and so here's somebody I knew when he was just a law student. And I knew he was sharp and knew he was interested in politics, and I think that's given me some sense of him as a person, and I always liked him. I don't always agree with him politically, but it's a sense of the person. I've known Dan Quayle, who was the vice president since before he ran for Congress here in 1976. In the 1992 presidential election, I thought, this is neat. I know the guy who's running for president on this ticket. I've known him for 22 years, and I know the person who's running for vice president and is vice president on this ticket. I've known him for 20 years. As mayor, you meet these big shot types, but these are people I met in school or just in the real world, and each of us do that. Each of us meet people that can make a difference in all sorts of things, and it doesn't always get the headlines or the glamour or the media scrutiny, but that doesn't make them really any different than we are.
Not at all. Well, just in wrapping up, what frustrates you the most, or scares you the most, or either as a just common citizen or mayor, or whatever?
Well, I guess there's a number of things that can be frustrating. One is, I get frustrated with local government. At the national level and the state level, and there's all sorts of frustrations there. They're organized in a way to respond. At the local level, in the county now, I think we've got 167 different local elected officials. We've got 4 layers of government: township, city, county, special districts. It's hard to make that system work together, I think, the way the people want things to be done. I guess some people might argue it's good to have all of the checks and balances, and you need that too, but that can get frustrating. Sort of just in terms of the general community, and this is both a positive and a negative too, there's a resistance to change, and there's a conservatism that is positive to the extent that people care about the community, care about the community's assets, want to keep what we've got that's good and strong, and that's positive. But some people argue that's part of the German influence in the community. The negative side of that, though, sometimes is such a resistance to change that maybe we wait too long. We wait till the crisis occurs before we worry about flood control efforts, or till the airport's almost broken and businesses are ready to leave before we fix the airport. We come together to preserve what we've got, but sometimes you really, it's hard to get the wake-up call into people, and it's that sense of resistance to change that's frustrating. And again, there's a positive side to that too. You want to keep what's good, but if there's things that need to be fixed, they need to be fixed. I mean, the saying always is, if it ain't broken, don't fix it. But sometimes we wait till it's broken down, collapsed, and we're far behind before we fix things too. So you need to balance that out. And as mayor, you try to, again, send that wake-up call, spot the problems before maybe the general public's realize that it's going to be a crisis if we don't take care of it. The other area is that you get some problems that are so big, so broad, that you need everybody getting involved in it. It's like the crime, the youth and violence issue. Clearly, the mayor and the police department and the parks department have a vital role to play in trying to solve that problem. But so does every single church and every single school and every single business and every single neighborhood in this community. And unless people start looking out for the kids on their block and the kids in their house and the kids across the street, we're not going to be able to solve that problem. It's more than government alone can handle. And getting through to people that all of us have to be a part of it. We can point fingers all we want at mayors and school superintendents and businesses and their hiring practices and everything else, but each of us needs to do something, and it's getting that through to people is a difficult thing too.
What's the future hold for you? Do you see more politics, going back to the private?
I really don't know. I kind of wish I knew. It's sort of like, what am I going to do when I grow up? But I mean, I grew up. I like politics. I like government. I've had the presidents of the United States memorized by the time I was in 4th grade, and read the biographies and like this stuff. One of the things I guess I've learned is that it's a screwy business too. I never would have picked Dan Quayle in 1976 to be vice president in 1989. Timing's important, luck's important, serendipity happens. And I guess I'm at the stage that I like politics, I like government. It might be fun to do something more, but that might not happen. And if it doesn't, I can go back and be a lawyer. I might want to go into teaching, being a professor some stage. I think you have to keep open to new ideas and be flexible. So there's a lot of things I'm interested in. There's a lot of things I like to do, and wait and see what happens.
Okay, and I got to ask you this. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think I read that your favorite book was Catcher in the Rye. Is that?
I don't know if
that's something in the paper. I'm sure.
That was one of my favorites growing up. Okay. I really like that. It's and like J.D. Salinger, Catcher in the Rye, and some of the other ones that he did, 50s, early 60s, were a strong influence on me. And it's sort of the role that how individual fits in with the society, and the disconnectedness and a lot of the things.
That's fine.
That is something I've really liked. I don't know if I put it as the #1, but it's clearly one of my favorites.
Yeah, mine too. All the Holden Caulfield, all the ponies and stuff like that.
I like collecting old things, and part of it is a little bit of a pat rack mentality. But I've got a Time magazine cover, and they had J.D. Salinger on the cover of Time, and this might have been 61 or 62, and I think it's when Franny and Zoe came out. But the picture, and Time magazine used to do a better job, I think, with paintings on the cover instead of photographs, but it's Salinger in the background. It shows a field of rye and a little boy standing at the edge of a cliff, looking at his back. And again, that's part of, the Catcher in the Rye, that Holden Caulfield thought that's what the song meant.
Exactly.
And the sense of insecurity in the big world, and how you relate, and who's real, and what of you is real. I think that's an important part, really, of me and of my generation and of all of us.
And I think it's a big part of what we've talked about today, is I think about it, and that you need to have this balance, the public Paul Helmke and the private Paul Helmke, and to be the mayor of everybody. That's what I told the time capsule people. I'll do the show, I'll be glad to, be honored to, but I'm not just going to do the big shots. I mean, everyone who lives in Fort Wayne, it's their city, and we can't get to everybody, of course, but we're trying to at least represent different people, I think with your public meetings where you have the public come in and talk to you, and you get to all the different kinds of neighborhoods. I mean, you've got, as thing of Holden, you've got the special interest, you know, the people with money, and of course you've got to pay attention to them. That's what fuels our country. But you've also got the, you know, the shoemakers, the average people, the janitor, who are also looking to the mayor as, you know, the guy that sets the tone kind of thing. So
that gets back to the, you know, I mean, I like people, and people are what make a community, and that's the strength of a community, that's the weakness of a community, and we do have good people here, and trying to capture that is hard, but that's what's exciting about this job. It gives me access to different people and different neighborhoods, and in a way that most people don't have that opportunity, and you know, I don't care if that's on TV or written up. I don't, you know, it's fun to meet people, and I think each of us can learn something. Maybe it's part of our search for what's real in us, is to talk to other people too.
Well, that's beautiful closing. That's great. Is there anything else you want to say to the future or to the current?
Sort of. I hope it's going well 100 years from now, and it's life can be a struggle, but life can be exciting too. We're given some time here, and I think our jobs are to try to figure out what we can do best. You know, I picture it in terms of I'm given talents by the Lord, and you try to figure out what those are and how to use them, and you don't know, and you just try.
That's not always easy.
No, not, yeah.
Mayor Helmke, thank you.
Okay.
It was a real
Enjoyed
pleasure.
That was fun.
A real pleasure. I know your back's probably hurting, so that was great. I mean,